welcome back to In the Dugout, your home of the beautiful game. And more specifically, welcome back to the Dugout debate, where I am joined, as always, with my whatever the hell Josh says, and my pals, Chris and Josh. How are you guys doing?
Yeah, not too bad. I can't really complain after a rather splendid performance by the Red Devils last weekend.
I have everything to complain about because seeing as Villa are second bottom of the
Is that
championship.
1 point from nine possible points this season?
To be fair, we're doing better than Burton, who've got 0 from
9.
I'm
sure Burton are...
But that's not
sure Burton are gutted.
Fortunately for Chris, this is a Premier League show, so we won't have to be talking about his horrendous football team. But we will be talking about a slightly different football team in our first round, which, as always, is Picture This. And this week's picture is a slightly strange-looking, exasperated, or perhaps something else looking, according to some of our team members, Antonio Conte. And guys, I mean, what's going on in this picture?
I'll kick us off. Is it just Antonio Conte looking a bit higher than Chelsea will be all season?
I've gone a slightly different route. I feel like he's just signed up for Ancestry.com to get to his roots and then realised it's got nothing to do with his hair.
Actually, linked with that, is it the face that you make when you realise that the only job you're going to have in a month's time is going to be advertising for Advanced Hair Studio?
Ouch.
He could get some tips off Joe Hart.
Flake free.
Or Pep Guardiola, for that matter.
Wayne Rooney.
Is he just showing the face of everyone who captained Sam Vokes in their fantasy team last week?
Well, has it finally dawned on Conte that he's actually ditched 2 Miss Worlds in favour of the runners-up of Miss Norwich and Miss Newport?
Or I feel like this could be a meme, and it's just like when you're trying to convince the barman that you're not that drunk.
Or my final guess is it that face you make when the irony dawns on you that you've got Beats being advertised in the background, and that's exactly what's going to happen to Chelsea every single week this season?
We have a winner, ladies and gentlemen.
Have any of you actually got the real answer to that question?
Well, yeah,
Christian.
This is Conte in his press conference after Burnley ended up beating Chelsea 3-2 away at Stamford Bridge.
Yeah, of course. So this face Conte made following a very shock result on the opening day of the Premier League weekend, where Chelsea did, as Chris said, lose 3-2 at home to a more lowly Burnley side. And we're going to go on and we're going to talk about that in a little more detail now.
So yes, as Alex just said, we are now moving on to a review of the Chelsea-Burnley game. And obviously we know that Burnley started off with a 3-0 lead, ended up winning 3-2. But Alex, I'll start with you. Where did it all go wrong for the champions? Because is it just beyond losing Costa and Matic, or is there something else that's deep-rooted, if you'll pardon the pun for Conte, inside Chelsea Football Club that has culminated in such a humiliating opening day defeat?
It's very difficult to say. I think part of it is a classic, season after syndrome, I suppose, where you come in, they've had a break, they're not on the same role they were last year, where they've had the same team playing for basically every single game in the season. But I think you mentioned it there. I think Costa is a huge loss. I think Morata played all right when he was, when he had the chances to do so. But I don't think Morata is a Costa replacement. I think playing with one striker, you do need someone who's so strong, so aggressive, and Costa gets in behind. He's like the whole package as a striker. But I don't think it's any secret that the real issue with Chelsea was their defence on that day. I mean, they conceded 3 goals to Burnley, and more importantly, a number of goals to Sam Vokes, who's not a bad striker, but I mean, I don't think he's looking at an international career anytime soon. And I think you hit the nail on the head. I think it's surprising how much having a monster in the middle of the park to really break up that play can have. And I mean, Kante's good cover, don't get me wrong, but he's not an out-and-out defensive midfielder. He's box-to-box. He's not a big presence, whereas Matic was. So that defence was just so much more exposed than we've seen it at any point last season. And I think that's going to take a little bit of time to get used to.
Chris, given Abramovich's tendencies to hire and fire, so to speak, is it plausible to say that we're going to see Antonio Conte at Stamford Bridge this time next year?
It purely depends on how Chelsea do. I mean, just going back to Chelsea's problems with that game, I feel like the real issue there was discipline because, of course, Gary Cahill was sent off very early on, and then later on in the match, Cesc Fabregas was sent off for a second bookable offence, and his first card was for sarcastically applauding the referee, which
absolutely should be a yellow.
I mean, yes, it's quite amusing, but you really shouldn't be having that happen with a team that were champions last season. And of course, like Alex said, the whole Costa situation is not helping. He's released an official statement today saying that he only wants to play for Atletico Madrid. Little bit ambitious when Atletico have a transfer embargo, but well, that's by the by. But yeah,
we'll forget that little caveat.
Yeah. So we'll just have to wait and see how Conte does because he obviously needs to improve pretty soon. And well, obviously having Fabregas and Cahill now suspended for the next games is just not very helpful in the slightest.
Yeah. This thing I want to throw out to the both of you. Obviously, there's no denying that Chelsea were just abysmal on the day. But is that the only reason that Burnley won? Or were Burnley actually good? Or were they just capitalising on Chelsea's mistakes? I mean, can we genuinely see Burnley maybe pushing for a top 10 finish, which their performance at the weekend certainly would justify?
I did watch the highlights actually on Match of the Day, and the pundits were all pointing out how Burnley had really sort of changed their style of football. A lot of their goals had come from set pieces, but it wasn't just like from a free kick, just lumping the ball into the box and hoping for something. No, it was a short free kick, just quick passing move. I saw with especially Stephen Ward's goal, which was a fantastic strike. They're obviously a changed side, and Sean Dyche is wanting to improve Burnley from just being sort of, I suppose the real word for it would be a West Brom style team where you can just score from set pieces. Burnley did play very well. They played Chelsea off the park when they lost Cahill, and then they were massively unlucky to end up conceding to who was it? Morata's first goal, which was excellent, and
David Luiz,
that was it. So yeah, I almost feel slightly bad for putting Burnley so low in my predictions now.
I think it's also a case of players stepping up in the absence of other big players. Obviously, you'd expect Andre Gray to be a massive loss for them after they sold him to Watford. But I mean, it gives Sam Vokes more of a run in the team, who has been at Burnley for a little while, and when he's played has always been a very consistent performer. And somebody that I think I mentioned really briefly last week, who massively underperformed last year, was Steven Defour, who I think they signed from Anderlecht or somewhere in the Belgian league the summer before this one. And he was excellent against Chelsea. Like, I know they were playing against less men, but it's so important to have that possession to play around the extra man when you do that. And it's very difficult to have that discipline. And Defour doing that and stepping up in the absence of other big players was really important to Burnley's victory. So if they can continue to do that and have players really step up in having lost players like Keane and Gray, I think they'll definitely perform a little bit better than perhaps some of us predicted this season.
I think you in particular, Alex, might have been slightly wrong in your prediction of Chelsea winning the league. I know it's a bit analytical, but anyway, it is going to go back to you, Alex, for our second week of fantasy football.
Yes, so it was an interesting first week in the Dugout Fantasy League, which started off going really badly for some of us, who then ended up at the top of the league. Some of us were slightly consistent performers in the middle of the park, and some of us have a little bit of work to do, but we'll get into all of that in a little bit more detail when I throw it over to these guys for them to tell you how they did last week, what they're going to do next week, and what their hopes are for the following fixtures. So I'll throw it over to you first, Chris. Talk to us a little bit about your fantasy team.
Well, I've made my two available changes. I've taken out Tammy Abraham and replaced him with Romelu Lukaku because... Well,
like for like.
Like for like. Look, I was foolish not to put Lukaku in. He's now my captain as well. So they're playing against Swansea, ironically. So hopefully that's going to work out pretty well. And speaking of Swansea, I've brought in Roque Mesa in place of Nasser Chadli because Chadli's injured and I needed someone to replace him.
Someone cheap,
And
presumably.
the obvious thing to do was
Yeah.
to pick a player for a team that you don't think is going to even score a goal.
Well, it doesn't matter because he's in midfield.
Okay.
just 3 points. And obviously I was pretty chuffed with my defensive choices, having 2 Spurs centre-backs and then by De Gea, so that worked out pretty well for me. But someone whose defence didn't work out quite as planned was yours truly, the People's Presenter.
So is this moving on to me now?
Yeah, I think
nice little segue there. It's not quite Oyston territory, but it's not bad. Right.
nothing beats Oyston territory.
So I just want to start off by saying that Posh's Pablos actually is top of the ITD presenters little mini league, if you like.
Not the presenters. No, just the presenters, not the actual.
Yes, that's what I said. Right, so I will start off by saying that Friday's game didn't work out too well for me. I mean,
and we were all there to witness.
Yeah, we all watched the Arsenal Leicester game together, and I was crying into my Chinese as Alex and Chris were just probably crying with laughter into their Chinese. As
you said that, I've never seen a man celebrate a Kolasinac assist more than you did.
But I suppose that was counteracted by the wonderful Red Devils performance with Lukaku as my captain, who saw me a lovely 24 points with his 2 goals. And also Paul Pogba nabbing a goal at the end, Rashford getting the assist. That's pretty much all there is to say about that. I had to take out Defoe and put in Manolo Gabbiadini because Defoe missed the game through. I think he came on in the second half, but he was a bit of a doubt. So yeah, that's all there is to report on my team, really. I'll talk about who my transfers are because that's going to be during this week, next time we record. So I suppose with inspiration of Chris, it's over to you, Laffery.
Right, so last week was pretty much, in my opinion, I pretty much smashed it with the exception of the most important player of the pitch, which is your captain. Pretty much, I think with the exception of one of my defenders, pretty much everybody got clean sheets. I had Mane and Salah in there expecting Liverpool to score goals, which they did. We won't talk about what happened at the other end and move on very swiftly. Aguero picked up a goal as well. I think Kane might have done as well. I'm not sure.
No, he didn't.
He might. Well, in that case, no, he didn't. But another player on the pitch who didn't do a great job for me was Kevin De Bruyne, who I actually captained, expecting him to maybe pick up a couple of goals, maybe an assist. But regrettably, he just got me points for appearance and nothing else, which allowed Josh to steamroll past me with Romelu Lukaku after the United game.
Despite having four Arsenal men in his defence.
I started Saturday in negative.
And it ended up with 6.
And now you're up in 5th in the league in total. We will give a shout out actually. We'll shout out the team who's currently at the top of the league with 77 points. Congratulations to Ewan Woodell with his team Gilfy Pleasures. Congratulations. I hope you're happy.
I sincerely hope he's not a Swansea fan, because otherwise...
And congratulations to Chris for being the best presenter of fantasy football this week.
You're more than welcome.
Chris, you dick. But just to round it off, just to talk about, I've made 2 transfers, as Chris has. I've taken out Ashley Williams because Everton are going to concede against Manchester City, and I've brought in Daley Blind because I'm backing Manchester United not to concede against Swansea, and I've also brought in Roberto Firmino for, I believe I brought him in for Harry Kane, but I'll just check. Yeah, I brought him in for Harry Kane. They've actually captained him because the way Liverpool are playing is like Mane and Salah as strikers and Firmino in behind. He's tending to at least get an assist or a goal. A lot of our stuff goes through him, so I'm backing him to at least pick up some points for us. And barring any more abuse of Josh's defence or any more praise of Josh's attack, I think that's pretty much everything of note for this week's fantasy football, and we'll move on to the next section.
So as per our previous episodes, we have the pitch of this section, and now we've come on to our number of the week, which this week is 94. So, lads, what could 94 mean?
Is it related to what we just spoke about? Is it how many points would I have on item if Arsenal hadn't selfishly conceded 3 goals against Leicester?
It's speaking of Arsenal, will it be how old Wenger is when he actually gives Claude, DT, and all the rest of the Arsenal Fan TV crew their wish and retires?
Well, linked into that, I was going to say, is it in how many years will Arsenal have to go without? Oh, sorry, how many years will Arsenal have to go without a trophy before Wenger is finally sacked?
Speaking of poor performances and sacking, is it the number of goals Liverpool will concede from set pieces this season?
Or,
He says with tears in his eyes.
Best player, Miguel Britos.
coming back to Arsenal again, is it if Arsenal were to win the title this season, how many years would it take per Mertesacker to do the lap of honour at the Emirates?
Oh, I quite like that one actually. Do either of you have the actual answer?
Well, I've got a couple more.
Even I've got one more at this point.
Unlucky Chris.
Well, be my guest and just
Simmer
give
down,
me more.
sunshine. Is it the percentage of our subscribers that are made up of Africans and robots?
Is it how old is the mother of Wayne Rooney's fourth unborn child?
Oh, we're going back to Rooney and care home
Yeah.
jokes.
Every time, every week. That's been a Diane Abbott meme this week.
Actually, speaking of that, is it? Is it?
That's the best segue of the episode.
Is it? How many pence does Diane Abbott think are in £9.4 million?
Oh, dear. Brilliant.
No, what about the actual answer?
Alex?
No, it is, of course, how many seconds into his Arsenal debut did Alexandre Lacazette manage to score a goal against Leicester?
That's correct. And we'll just go ahead and segue right into talking about the Arsenal-Leicester game now.
Great segue.
Okay, cool.
Okay, so for our second review of the week, we are going to look at the Arsenal-Leicester game, which was a very, very intense, closely fought 4-3 victory eventually for the home team. But my first question to you, Chris, is with Arsenal's leaky defence, excusing my I-team for a second, is Arsenal's leaky defence going to cost them a place in the top four this season?
Oh, almost definitely. I mean, because Arsenal were without some of their, well, in my opinion, their best defenders. Mustafi was out. Mertesacker was out with his injury. I think he may well have been on the bench looking like Scarface. So that just leaves you with Rob Holding, who's fairly inexperienced. Kolasinac, who's new. And then who was the other Arsenal defender on that day? I can't quite remember.
They had Bellerin.
Monreal.
Yeah, Monreal, who's not a centre-back by any stretch of the imagination. And also they had Koscielny out. I think he was suspended. And Koscielny is probably Arsenal's best defender.
Yeah.
Although looking at how many goals they conceded, that's not saying much. But I feel like that's probably just being slightly unfair on Leicester, because I feel like they did excellently to not only come back but then go ahead. Jamie Vardy looked excellent on the day, and Shinji Okazaki being allowed to play as well, rather than these other strikers who Leicester had brought in last year, like Ahmed Musa and Islam Slimani. I feel like they still aren't really Premier League ready. So having Okazaki, who, well, is and can pop up with the goals, just obviously makes a world of difference for Leicester.
And Alex, was it a performance that's going to see Craig Shakespeare keep his job?
I don't think Craig Shakespeare was necessarily that much in trouble anyway. He kept Leicester up, and I know there's a lot of things going on about, because of the season before, Ranieri got sacked as a victim of his own success. I think to some extent the Leicester owners probably know where they're at, and I think that kind of performance against what is, jokes aside, a strong Arsenal side, is definitely going to impress the Leicester owners. I would hope Craig Shakespeare keeps his job, because I mean, it's hard not to have been impressed with him since he came in and started taking charge of Leicester. And last week's performance was, it was worthy of a win. They were very unlucky to lose, and I think at the end of the day, it just came down to Arsenal having a better team, Arsenal having options like Giroud off the bench to come and make that impact late in the game, which Leicester don't necessarily have. So I don't think Craig Shakespeare can be faulted. I really don't think Leicester at all can be faulted for that loss.
And something to both of you, were you guys impressed with the Arsenal strike, the new look Arsenal strike force?
Well, I was very impressed with Lacazette. I mean, scoring 94 seconds into your Premier League debut, that's obviously boding well for the future. Danny Welbeck, it was good to see him not only starting but scoring again, because I feel like he's pretty much wasted at Arsenal, or at least he has been for the last few years, because they've just not been using him. And then, of course, you have Aaron Ramsey and Giroud both coming off the bench and ending up get the win for the Gunners. And of course, there's all this talk that Giroud may end up leaving for West Ham, which I feel like would be a bit of a wrong decision on Arsenal's part, because he's an impact sub. That's what he does. He comes on late in the game and scores. And obviously, in this game, it got Arsenal the win. So he's obviously pretty crucial for them. And I feel like he's got one of the best relationships with Wenger in that Arsenal team as well.
Yeah, just to talk a little bit more about Lacazette, who obviously you mentioned, when we were all watching the game, we were all talking about the comparison between him and Griezmann, saying that we thought Lacazette would be much more suited to the Premier League than Griezmann because sort of physical aspect he has to his game, his ability to hold up the ball despite only being, I think, 5'9". And I think we saw a lot of that. He may have been somewhat less, visible after the first 94 seconds of the game, because obviously he didn't get another goal. But I mean, Arsenal didn't supply him that much, and when he did get a chance, I remember there was one chance where he had the ball there, 2 or 3 defenders around him, and managed to sort of jink in and out, go sort of to the left and take a shot, which it required a very, very good save from Kasper Schmeichel to tip it over the bar. And he held up the play very well, and I was very impressed with him. I think in a game where Arsenal in general are slightly more in control of the game, where all of their big players are performing, where Mesut Ozil has one of his 3 games in the season where he actually has a good game. I think that Lacazette could really be an asset to that team based simply on what we've seen in that game.
Okay, well that rounds off our match reviews for the week. Now moving on to the penultimate segment of this episode, which is the score predictions for next week. Over to you again, Chris.
Okay, so we're just going to look at 2 games in extreme detail, I suppose you could call it, or more detail
Extreme detail.
More detail than just rattling off the scores. The first of which is actually the first game of the upcoming weekend, which is Swansea hosting Man United at the Liberty Stadium on Saturday at 12:30. So what are your predictions for the game, and how do you think it's going to play out for both teams?
Well,
I'll let you roll with this one, Josh.
Thank you. I can only see United replicating their form from the West Ham game. I know they're away, but Swansea didn't score against Southampton, and I don't expect much of Swansea this season, really. United looking like they're just going to be powering on for the title. I can only really see another 4-0 win for United, if maybe 1 goal less or more either side. But the power up front with Lukaku, Rashford, Mkhitaryan, Pogba and Matic supporting them matter as well. The strong defence of De Gea in goal, with the combination of Jones and Bailly, which is looking like a pretty good centre-back pairing actually, with Valencia and I think it was Darmian on either as the full-backs as well. It's just an insane starting 11. And with people like Martial coming off the bench, Fellaini is an impact sub in the sort of dying embers of the game. I can only see United building on their win against West Ham and pretty much replicating that result.
Appreciate you rattling off the entire starting 11 and some substitutes there, Josh. I think it's also worth noting that Swansea are going to be noticeably psychologically rattled by having lost Gylfi Sigurdsson to Everton literally yesterday as we're recording this. And also, I don't know if he played in the first game. I wouldn't be surprised if he hadn't, based on all the sort of speculation going around. But I mean, everything Swansea did well last season went through Gylfi Sigurdsson. I think maybe someone like Fernando Llorente might be able to just pop up with a free goal from a set piece or a random cross, but I mean, I can't see United losing this one either. I'm not sure it'll be as heavy a scoreline as West Ham. I think it very feasibly could be. I think West Ham are probably a better side than Swansea, but first game of the season and second game of the season are worlds apart in terms of you have had that 90 minutes of Premier League experience under your belt, and I think Swansea will come into it perhaps a slightly more dogged side than West Ham United were against Man U. And I think that Man U will probably win something like 2-0, maybe 3-0, but it's clear Manchester United win for me.
Yeah, I've got United down to win 3-0 as well. I feel like, well, like you said, Swansea will be rattled by the loss of Gylfi Sigurdsson, and I believe Fernando Llorente is actually out injured, so that's obviously not much help. And obviously with the way United played against West Ham, they just played them off the park, so I can only really see a United victory. And then we're going to turn to the other side of Manchester for the second game we're going to look at in detail. That's on Monday evening with Man City hosting Sigurdsson's new team, Everton. So what are your thoughts on this one?
Well, I think City are going to just take this 2-1. They played Brighton at the weekend, and Brighton just come out. I think they're by far the weakest of the three promoted sides. So I don't think it's really fair to say that City outclassed them, because the difference between Man United beating West Ham 4-0 and Man City, was it? I think
it was 2-0.
2-0.
Yeah.
Beating Brighton 2-0 is that West Ham have got a lot of Premier League pedigree in their side. They've got a lot of experienced Premier League players. Brighton have just come up. They've got a lot of newbies. So I think, not that we are, but just if you're looking at if they're going to build on their results from last week, I think Man City have got the attack. I'm not sure about their defence. I don't think they were threatened too much against Brighton defence-wise. I'm still not sure about their defence, particularly the goalkeeper and the centre-back pairing. So I can see Everton maybe grabbing a goal, perhaps through Rooney again, possibly. He's certainly showing a resurgence in form. So I think City will edge it just 2-1 with maybe Aguero grabbing a brace.
I've got a similar score. I think City are going to edge it as well, but I've put 3-2 just purely because City score a lot of goals. I mean, that's no secret. One of the most free-flowing attacking teams in the entire league. And one place that Everton haven't put a lot into improving. Yes, they signed Michael Keane, but is their defence. I mean, I still think Everton have a little bit of weakness in defence. I don't really think they have a strong defensive midfielder. Idrissa Gueye is great, but he's more of a Kante mould than a Matic mould, if you understand what I mean. I think that does make a big difference. So I can see City scoring a lot of goals against Everton, but equally, Everton have, as much as it pains me to say it, done some seriously good business in the transfer window, capped off with perhaps a slightly overpriced signing, but nonetheless a very good signing of Gylfi Sigurdsson, as we mentioned just before, for 45 million. And I mean, with the options they have going forward, I think the only thing they're missing is a world-class striker. But I mean, with the likes of Rooney, with the likes of Sigurdsson, the likes of some of the other signings that they've made, I think they're going to create chances. And I think against what is not a particularly strong Manchester City defence, I think they might grab a couple of goals. So I'm going to say 3-2.
Well, I have to side with Josh on this one. I also think it's going to be 2-1 to City. I will give Brighton some credit because it took City about 70 minutes to break them down for a team that's just come up having to play one of the title favourites at home on the opening day, and then to only really concede 2 against Man City is actually something worth mentioning. So I feel like City will have a bit more trouble breaking down Everton. Like you said, they've got sort of much more Premier League proven experience in their team, and they've been spending off the park really to improve their squad. So yeah, I'm pretty much just echoing what you both said. I think it's going to be 2-1 City, and perhaps a goal from Aguero and Gabriel Jesus actually. And now we're just going to turn to the other games of the upcoming weekend and just rattle off our score predictions. So we'll start off with Bournemouth hosting Watford at Dean Court. What do you think of that?
I think we finished 1-1.
I put 3-1 to Bournemouth.
I've gone the other way. I've gone 2-1 Watford actually.
Well, that's going to be right.
I would say that sticking 3 past Liverpool is impressive, but it's Liverpool.
It's not. It's not at all.
Well, we'll now turn to Turf Moor with the shock result providers Burnley as they host West Brom. What do you think of that?
2-1 home win.
0-0 all over it.
1-1 draw. So sorry, West Brom. I'm pretty much just going to predict you to draw every single week.
Yeah, basically. That's my strategy.
Hey, with Gareth Barrett and Jay Rodriguez, they're going to win the league.
Hey, Jay Rodriguez is a good
fair, I'll give credit to them picking up Ahmed Aghazi. That was a pretty good debut goal for it, especially for a centre-back. But lo and behold, a centre-back scoring for West Brom. Who would have thought it? Especially for set piece as well. I mean, it's just Tony Pulis written all over it. Leicester City hosting the aforementioned Brighton. What do you think of that?
I think it's going to be another 2-0 loss for Brighton, 2-1 Leicester. Sorry, 2-0 Leicester.
1-1.
I've gone 2-1 Leicester. I feel like Brighton will actually end up scoring
I think Brighton
eventually.
could fight, personally.
And now we turn to the infamous Crystanbul fixture, except it's at Anfield this time. We've got Liverpool hosting Palace.
I think it's going to be 2-0 Liverpool.
We're going to stop them at 1 goal this time, but we're still going to score 3-1 Liverpool.
I've gone for 2-1 Liverpool. Southampton hosting West Ham. Bear in mind they've now gone 6 home games without scoring, which I think is a club record.
I think I might end that record with a 1-1 draw.
I'd be inclined to agree that they might end that record with a 1-1 draw.
I think it'll be a 2-1 West Ham win, actually. I feel like probably Chicharito to pop up with a goal. Stoke City hosting Arsenal.
2-0 win for Arsenal.
2-1 win for Arsenal.
I have to concur.
Choupo-Moting.
I have to concur with Josh. I think it's going to be a 2-0 Arsenal win. And now we've come to 2 of the newly promoted teams. Huddersfield hosting Newcastle.
So I think that's going to be Newcastle just edging it 2-1. I was actually really impressed with Huddersfield's performance. So 2-1 just about for Newcastle.
Huddersfield impressed me to a level where I think at home, 1-1. I think that'll happen.
I think it'll also be 1-1. I'm just going to stick with Huddersfield quickly because I think it was either Alan Shearer or Ian Wright on Match of the Day. They made an excellent point about Steve Mounier, who popped up with 2 of Huddersfield's goals.
Yeah.
He cost them 11 million from Montpellier. He scored 14 league goals last season, which is only 1 less than Kylian Mbappe. And yet Kylian Mbappe is getting all the hype because he's younger.
To be fair, and he was in a different league, and
he was playing in the Champions League.
He was playing in.
Apart from all that, it was a good point.
He was playing in the team that won the league as well. And now we've come
to Mbappe too.
What? No, I'm talking about Mbappe.
Oh, he was Mounier. Yeah.
No, not Mounier.
He didn't win the league.
That's what I meant. That's what I meant.
No. Anyway, we've come to the final game, which is Spurs hosting Chelsea in a London derby.
Yeah, I think it's going to be 2-1 Tottenham. I just can't see Chelsea doing much anytime soon, really.
2-1 Chelsea, they're going to bounce back. Head to head first.
2-0 Spurs. So, yeah, that rounds off our score predictions. Hopefully Chelsea will continue losing and won't win the title. So Alex's table prediction will be wrong, which would be rather amusing. But now we're just going to turn to...
No, we're not yet.
Oh, not yet? No?
No, we need to look at our scores from last week and see where we are in the table.
Yes,
mini
sure.
table.
Well, are you going to take that?
I wasn't going to have to. Right, well, I will put the scores last week on the screen. So green will correspond if we got the score right. Orange will be if we got the result right, and red will be if we got it completely wrong. And so I believe that it's Chris at the top of the table with 8 points, Alex with 6, and I'm at the bottom with 5. But it's all to play for next week, so we'll see how we get on. Back to you, Chris.
I think I might be in trouble, to be fair, because, I've picked different results to both of you on most of those.
Well, we'll just have to wait and see, won't we? So now we'll turn to, the Dugout debate, the namesake of this whole bleeding series. We'll see you in a bit for that.
Okay. Like 2 seconds.
Yes, and now on to our final section of the show, which is, of course, as Chris said, the Dugout debate section of the Dugout debate. And this week we've actually changed up the format a little bit. So traditionally we've always done, for example, who is the best player in the Premier League, for example, is a really basic debate. And we all pick a different one, sort of debate it out, and then basically let you guys decide who actually won. We've decided to change it up a little bit. We're going to have sort of broader debates, not because of a lack of creativity, because we can't think of anything more or anything like that, of course. And we're just going to try and find ones where at least one of us differs from the other ones. And we're going to have a little talk about it, a bit of a discussion, and basically just try and fight out to see whose points are better made. And this week we're going with something a little bit more topical, which is a proposed change to make the transfer window end basically when the season starts, as opposed to when it normally does on the 31st of August, which is traditionally about 3 weeks into the season. And I believe it's the case that myself and Josh agree with this proposed change. I think it should be the case. And Chris is perhaps a little bit more on the fence, siding more towards the fact that we should keep it how it is. So considering I'm hosting, considering you are the opposition, Chris, I'm going to let you say your piece first.
Well, I'm just going to preface this by saying this is all done with zero preparation on everyone's part, so this will probably be very waffly, but oh well. I feel like, of course, you have pre-season to help your new players get accustomed to the team before the season starts, and then obviously the window ends on the 31st of August, so that, like you said, it's about 3 weeks into the season. But pre-season is a completely different beast to the actual league. So I feel like it's far more sort of helpful to have those few more weeks of transfer activity being allowed to happen for any sort of eventuality, like losing a player to an injury, or just finding ways where you need to improve your squad against the likes of, the league opposition rather than just the teams you've been playing in friendlies.
Okay.
Yeah, fair enough. Josh, you got anything to say to that?
Yeah, well, I not so much in response to that, but just as a general point. I think it was 2002, 2003, something like that, where the first transfer windows were introduced, and I believe that was to sort of alleviate the pressures during the whole season of the transfers and everything, because before you could make transfers during any time during the season, and that just didn't seem particularly helpful, because signing a player in March is just a bit of an odd thing to do. Equally, I think signing a player in the third week of the season is an odd thing to do. Teams should have their squads ready to go until January, and then that's when they can reassess their squads again. I just don't understand why clubs need 3 weeks to know where they need to strengthen. If they don't know by the beginning of the season, then they really should. And if they don't, then I think they're playing with fire, really, trying to leave it until the last minute to make these signings. And also, deadline day, there's this whole sort of, the Jim White on Sky Sports News hype about he wears his yellow tie. It's all a bit of a, it's probably a bigger event than the FA Cup final is these days. But well, it is though, and I just don't understand why we need all this thing just about teams bringing their transfers. Like Marouane Fellaini brought in on transfer deadline day for no reason whatsoever. I know he's not done daddy these days, but I mean, it's like clubs just want to make a status signing on transfer deadline day, and by once again having that partway through the season, often when that player has already played maybe 1 or 2 matches for a team playing in the same division. Sometimes that player can be cup tied, whether that's for the Champions League or for the FA Cup, for the League Cup, whatever. It just doesn't really help anyone. So if they bring it backwards, or forwards rather, to the beginning of, or before the beginning of the season, maybe the weekend before, I don't think it just helps everyone all around.
See, my perspective on it is, in many ways, a little bit similar to Josh's, in that one reason I think that the proposed change could work is because, to me, it just simply doesn't make sense to have the transfer deadline day on the 31st of August, aside from the fact that it's a nice round thing, and it is every year. To me, it just kind of seems like they put it there because it's a nice round day. It doesn't actually make any sense. There's no benefit to it. There's not necessarily a huge amount of detriment to it, but to me, it just would make more sense for it to be really at the start of the season. And it would also, I mean, I might be slightly biased based on the goings-on of this summer at Liverpool Football Club, but I mean, at this point, if you've got players who perhaps are wanting to leave to break out of their contract in clubs that are refusing to sell, then you're looking at 1, 2, 3 weeks into the season whereby you've kind of got this period where you might start to play at your club, but they're refusing to play, and that means you're playing without one of your best players. And
they've got a back injury.
They've got this back injury, and you're kind of in limbo between not having your best player and not having not sold your best player, so you don't have the money so you can replace your best player. And having something that starts at the start of the transfer window would mean that by that point, if you get to start the season and that player isn't sold, then the majority of players, obviously there will be some exceptions, but the majority of players will go, well, I'm not getting sold till at least January. Suck it up, play anyway. And then from the start of the season, you've got the squad that you've got. Whereas some certain teams, Swansea have suffered from it for a week with Gylfi Sigurdsson. Liverpool are suffering from it with Felipe Coutinho. Southampton the same with Virgil van Dijk. You're missing good players just because there's this air of uncertainty because of this random date where the transfer window is placed. And I don't really think it makes a huge amount of sense to have it there. And just as a smaller point, a shorter transfer window means a higher concentration of transfers happening. None of this fannying about with tapping up and all this absolute rubbish that people go about and do. Like actual transfers, none of this, oh, we might be interested in them. People just get transfers through sort of the door, get it all done. And by the start of the season, you know exactly what squad you have for the next 4-5 months or however long it is from August to December. And I just think it makes more logical sense for it to be that way.
So then, speaking of logic, when you've got you've got the specified dates for the current window. Starts July the 1st, ends 31st of August. That's 2 months, specified date. The start of the season is not a specified date because you have, for example, the Championship, League One, League Two. They all start a week before the Premier League. So there you're just left with this 1 week of limbo for them. And you also have the Premier League then starting a week after. And of course, the league doesn't always start on the same day anyway, and leagues start on different dates all around the world. So it's just you're just left with this complete sort of informal sort of mishmash of dates.
Well,
it's just going to it's going to get even more confusing, though, is my point, because when you have a specified amount of time, 2 months, to get all your business done, are you just suggesting that we're going to have the Premier League or League One, League Two, the Championship all start on one specific day each remaining year, so then you can just keep the same amount of time to get all your transferred business done? Or is it just going to be a different amount of time each year?
Well, it's not true that you only have 2 months to complete transfers, because clubs actually announce transfers in May, June, but it doesn't become official until July the 1st. So saying that they can't make transfers until July is a bit of a myth. But also, all around the world, there's different transfer deadline days, because, for example, the USA, their league's completely different. They have their transfer deadline day completely differently to ours because of the way their season's dated. And I think like Norway, Denmark, those sort of countries also have different timings. But it doesn't mean to say that all the Football League and Premier League teams have to start their matches on the same date. For example, the Championship, I think that starts the week before.
It starts
the Premier League.
a week before, yeah.
Yeah, so say the Premier League kicks off on the 13th of August, just as an example. That means that the first game in the Championship would be the 3rd of August. So why not make the transfer deadline day the 1st of August every year? Because I don't remember there ever being a Football League match that starts on the 1st of August. If you want a round date, or 31st of July, that's still plenty of time to get your transfers in, instead of all this fast-arsing around with, oh, we'll wait till transfer deadline day to try and screw through an exciting signing, which is like £5 million Gareth Barry, for example.
1 million.
Yeah, I'm not talking about West Brom. I'm just talking just in general. I just think it makes more sense to have it before all of the season starts in England. Doesn't mean we have to combine all of the dates to be starting in one go. Just bring the transfer deadline day even before the Championship or the Football League season starts.
This is why I'm on the fence, so it's your job to convince me. You're doing a good job. I mean,
I think that there is an issue in terms of if you had it, the transfer deadline day is the day before the Premier League season starts, then you've got yourself a bit of a problem, sure. But I think that, like Josh says, people do sort of get started on transfers way before and then announce them when the window actually opens. And I think if you could, obviously, with things like MLS, it's impossible to match up things like that. But if you're talking about, generally speaking, the big European leagues, if you can get an agreed upon date where it's just before the start of basically all their seasons, whether that makes it, maybe it starts a week before the Premier League season or 10 days if there's another league. If perhaps, for example, the Serie A started 10 days before, which it may well not do, but just to give an example. I think the point is there are ways of working around the difficulties of having it sort of start on an agreed upon point with which works with the different leagues. But I think the point still about having it end before the start of the Premier League season or the start of any of the big seasons still stands. I think that it's difficult to work around the fact that it is detrimental to have it for 3 weeks going on after the start of the season, which to me doesn't make a whole lot of sense. And I think if you can work around that point about about starting at different points for different leagues because they all have different start points of their seasons, then I think generally speaking, the idea of having it before anyway still does hold up as a decent concept.
Okay, I think that's
I've,
pretty much us done.
yeah,
Yeah.
I've got nothing else.
Okay, well, I guess in that case, that rounds off the dugout debate. And as a greater point, the dugout debate. Let us guys know what you think in sort of the comments. Tell us whether you think that we should move it back, whether we should keep it as it is, maybe how we could work around the problem of the different season starting dates for the different leagues. And generally give us any feedback. We'd love to hear what you think about the entire episode and the new formats. And yeah, thank you very, very much for watching. We will be here next week. Again, feel free to join our fantasy league. We'll put information for that either in the description on the screen, or you can go back to the last episode to go and view how to join that if you still want to come in. And yeah, we will see you next week. So until next time, we'll see you later. Bye-bye.
See ya. Like, follow, and subscribe for more content from In the Dugout, your home of the beautiful game.